My guest today is entrepreneur Ramon Goni, founder at Swoon, New York. Ramon, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming.
Hi, thank you.
Perhaps you could start off by kindly telling our audience a little bit about yourself.
All right. So I'm originally from Spain, although currently I live in Los Angeles. I launched my business in New York, as its name says, Swoon, New York. And the last few years of my life have been the combination, as I was saying, of many years of figuring out what it is that I can do best. And as a professional, but also as a human being. And what I feel that sums it all up is the answer to the question, what can I do to serve my community best? And my community are different things. It's different communities, and mainly the central community that I serve to would be the filmmaking and artistic community. That's what has become sort of the central point of both my business and my artist collective. But the road to that answer, to that sort of central community that I serve at the moment, has been mired by a lot of adventures. First as a political science and law student, then as a journalist working primarily for the BBC in New York and all other places around the world, and then lately in the last 10-15 years. That storytelling turned into film, basically, as a director of photography, and a head creative for my company soon.
Yeah, so I was just reading some of the projects that you've been working on, but you've worked on the Netflix, The Crown, Narcos. It's pretty exciting projects you've been working on there.
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult since we're talking about entrepreneurs, it is difficult to see the big picture of what we do, because we're so focused on the day-to-day, on basically the survival task of any business owner and any creative. But when I look back at some of the work that I've done, essentially, it is catering to some of the biggest networks and content producers in Hollywood, such as Netflix, Amazon, even Apple Plus, doing their commercial advertising campaigns. I mean, essentially doing the promo campaigns for the biggest shows, the most awarded Emmy-nominated shows, such as The Crown, such as Marvelous Mrs. Maisel on Amazon, Narcos, etc. So, I mean, it's been an interesting ride that has been very much informed by my collaboration with other creatives, and that's, I think, if there is something that I really want to talk about today with you, that I think is very important for people to understand, is that idea, I would say, or that sort of mirage of the lonely or lone entrepreneur who builds everything from the ground up by him or herself is completely false. I mean, I would be nowhere and I would be no one without the help of mentors, of people that have taken me along the way for some of those projects that you mentioned and that I mentioned. It is very important to collaborate, to help propel other people's careers as you are creating your own. And that's been my luck and also my choice by being in places like New York and Los Angeles, where I've been able to meet those people.
Very refreshing and nice to hear. I think it's I know exactly what you mean. I think a lot of entrepreneurs do make it out that they've done it all on their own, and it's it is a difficult process. And but of course, as you quite rightly put it, I think a lot of people who've done well have had mentors, have had a lot of people supporting them, and it's important to recognise that. So well said. I mean, just looking at your career. And I'm trying to understand, how did you come up with your company? What happened? How did you become an entrepreneur? What's the process?
The process is very much an accident. I like to say that I became an entrepreneur by accident, And again, that feeds the narrative of the lone entrepreneur who builds everything from the ground up. And again, I want to counter the narrative because it's not true. But the initial aspect of it was true. I found myself having to make a very consequential choice about where I wanted to live. It was 2009, and I had been working for the BBC for several years after I finished my school, and I was basically told that I had the opportunity to pursue the career that I had dreamt of all my life since I was 15 as a foreign correspondent for the media outlet that I considered the most reputable in the world, and still is, I think. And they told me, you can go to whatever you want in Latin America. You can go to Mexico. You want to go to Argentina. You can go whatever. You'll be our unsponsored reporter, which is a very BBC term, meaning that they only have you there, but they're not quite sponsoring you, and that's because of how the license fee has been reduced over and over again. They cannot afford a lot of things that they used to be able to, and at that point, I had to choose between New York City and the community of artists that I was referring to earlier. That was starting to propel me in a different direction than the one that I had set for myself when I was 15, and I fell in love with radio. And I had to choose. It was one of those choices that you remember forever. It's like, well, do I become that correspondent that at age 55 is possibly divorced with 2 kids living in different countries and having a pretty miserable life, fighting for their job over and over again because people decide every 4 years that maybe it's not a good idea to have a public service informing people, and then we're seeing it now with all these elections going on around the world and how the media takes the blame. Or do I stay in New York and do I build something new, something different that allows me to continue working with those artists that I had met? And I'm talking about photographers, I'm talking about musicians, I'm talking about the person who became my business partner, a doll maker, a doll designer. How odd, like going from reporting at the UN and interviewing presidents of nations to, partnering up with a doll maker and traveling with the world with him. His name is Andrew Yang, and yeah, that's exactly what I did. I mean, I went through 2 iterations of my current artist collective. I steer away from calling it a business because it is and it isn't. And that's how it all started, out of a decision that was a very, very risky one, a very consequential one, but a decision that I'm very proud of. Almost a decade later.
So was it well planned for my listeners to understand? Was it just simply a decision, either go and continue with the BBC job role or start this collective? Was it that black and white?
No, as a lot of things in my life, they happened gradually. I didn't stop working for the BBC one day and start a company. I had no idea what managing a company was. I mean, I knew that I was going to have to sign a lot of papers, but that was about it. It was a transition that took, I would say, 2 years to be completed, to the point where I started making money. I mean, let us remember that it was the peak of the recession as well. It was 2009 when, somehow I had some sort of work stability because I was working for a public media outlet, publicly funded media outlet like the BBC. But a year after the recession hit, obviously revenue for this media outlet also fell, and we had to. I mean, my income was being slashed essentially, and so it was out of necessity decision that also had a lot of legal implications in terms of how I was going to be working legally in the United States. I had to find ways to go through that whole entire process. I only had 6 months to figure it out, and I was very lucky. Honestly, I was very lucky that at the time we had a government that in the United States that actually promoted an immigration policy that was not as nonsense as it is right now. And so the process was relatively smooth for me to both launch the company with an American business partner and also to be able to get all the papers sorted to stay in the country and to work legally through this company. Now, in that process, there were also a lot of questions about whether I should continue working as a journalist. I continued actually filming and working as a reporter for the BBC for those 2 years. But at some point, it just stopped making sense to have that sort of dual allegiance, if you will. It was either I had to put my time into this adventure of running a business and trying to make money with it, or I could, continue working for the big guys, which,
that must have been quite hard to give up that kind of, I guess, I always think it's a badge of honor, isn't it? Being a reporter for the BBC and having that prestige, to give that up and focus in on one platform or one project. And so, like you say, it's a gradual process, but it must have been quite hard. I'm thinking about my listeners that must have that similar pain point in their lives where they've got a job that say, but they know they could be doing something else, but they don't quite know how to make the leap. Sounds like you did it over time.
It was hard, but again, I think there is something that all entrepreneurs share, which is this kind of survival instinct. And that is what also guides the gut instinct on what it is that needs to be done. I mean, there is the difference between what I want to be doing and what I need to be doing is sometimes massive. Especially when you have obligations to an idea that you've created, that you've launched, to a business that pays people's living, and the goal is to bring that what I want to be doing and what I need to be doing to make it all work closer together. So in that initial stage of transitioning from my dream job, honestly, to this new thing that I didn't know where it was going to lead. There was a huge disparity between that. I want to be doing this. I wanted to be doing basically the things that I'm doing right now, but I needed to be doing makeup tutorials. I mean, granted, for Vogue magazine, for Revlon, for big brands and companies, but I remember finding myself, I think it was 2011, one night at 2 a.m. editing the cat eye. I mean, for our listeners who are not very informed on makeup, I mean, the cat eye is a fascinating process that takes a lot of steps and that you can teach in 3 minutes in a video that will be edited over and over and over again until it's absolutely perfect. And I had this client that was so meticulous about the cat eye that I was just horrified about the fact that I was at my office at 2 a.m. editing a cat eye video after having done the things that I had done in my other career. And I was like, that was one of the moments where it's like, why am I doing this? Why am I, working on this? Like, what do I care about a cat eye when people are, talking about really important issues right now and the world is changing and all those things? Well, that's what I needed to be doing in order to be able to do what I wanted to do in the future. And that projection and that sacrifice is not for everyone.
It's a very, very good point, though. I think there's two things there I want to make sure the audience pick up on. One is I do firmly also believe focus is important. You can't, as you said earlier, have your attention split between two people, two things, two businesses, two ideas. So you focused in on one, and then that sacrifice. I mean, people start their own business. I think sometimes why they fail is they don't recognize what you're talking about here, which is you are going to do things that are also not fun, but you have an end game in mind. And if you can get to the end game, those small pain points become insignificant and even a story for later, like now. They become a story for later, right? As to what you had to do to push through to get where you wanted to be. But did you know your destination from day one? Did you know that you wanted to be producing the things that you've since produced? Did you know that at the beginning?
I definitely did not. I think, again, I would say that there are two ways of guiding yourself through the very murky, dark road of entrepreneurship, especially at the beginning. One is having an incredibly specific goal, and also a sort of a status pursuit, which again, I mean, for a lot of people, it works. It makes them a lot of money. It makes them sell their business really fast and make a lot of money, and then having to figure out what to do next, which is a very existential crisis for people who are always looking for the new next thing. Or you can choose it's not as dualistic as this, but in my case, I chose a very different route, which is a much longer term path that was focused on feeling, on the pursuit of a feeling that I experienced in a film set on the first short film that I created with my partner at the time, my business partner at the time, Andrew. We created this slow motion short film with a dancer and with his dolls, and it was like super abstract and artistic. I didn't know that I was able to do that I was going to be able to put that together with a lot of sweat and tears. Honestly, I was literally carrying a lot of equipment up and down my apartment, my tiny studio apartment in New York, and a lot of things happened before that shoot. But when I was on the film set and I was surrounded by this really awesome team, I had this feeling of companionship, of partnership, of collaboration, but also I shed a couple of tears of joy, and those couple of tears of joy when I was looking at the monitor and I was seeing what we had created and what we were in the process of creating. When I saw, this 20 seconds that we filmed expand into 2 minutes because it was extreme slow motion, and I saw that was actually something that I was creating with other people. I felt that, and that's when I told myself, okay, this is what I need to. If I manage to create something once or twice a year that makes me feel this, I'm doing something right. And that's what I've been basically doing for all these years. I mean, there's been all sorts of ups and downs, financial, physical, emotional, but every year I've I think, without exception, I've managed to have one or two of those experiences.
I think the word feeling is not used enough in business. I think there's so much, let's do a business plan. What market gap do we feel? What I'm getting from what you're saying, and I really love it, is this feeling point. Like you did something and you felt something, and that's what you decided to pursue as a business model. You pursued a business model around feelings. And I think that's really an interesting way of looking at things, because most of the time it is a business model, right? A business plan. And so it's an interesting insight for people. How did you correlate this kind of, your whole life sounds like you're growing up with this dream job in mind and then letting it go? Do you ever have days where you want to go back to that old life?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's especially right now with all the things that are happening, especially in the United States. I mean, I tell myself day in and day out, what am I doing? Why am I not out there with my microphone and my camera, telling the story? I don't think I will ever cease to be a storyteller. The shape of those stories and the reach and how they're created is what's changed now. And that was the goal. It's like I was making that decision as with this idea in mind of, well, I want to create much higher quality content than what I was creating at the time, working for the BBC, and it was pretty good already, but I felt that I wanted something bigger and better, and just to add to what we just talked about that feeling, I think it is important to be guided by those feelings while having a very solid foundation of what the structure that allows those feelings to expand, to develop, to build new things can create. And that's what, I mean, honestly, the film industry is about. It's an industry, and it's a business driven by I wouldn't say exploiting emotions, but definitely manipulating emotions in order to make people feel things so they can actually understand certain events that we are all going through. And for that to happen, you need an incredibly organized and solid structure that obviously is what I've had to develop and to change several times over the last few years, until I found a place where, going back to what I was saying earlier, I can make what I want to be doing and what I need to be doing come closer and closer and closer. So going back to your question, yes, I definitely question myself. I definitely ask myself sometimes, do I want to pitch some news stories to the BBC where I still have a lot of friends working, or do I want to be the story? And that's actually kind of what I've been leaning towards in the last few months, is like, well, for the first time, maybe I could be the story. I could be part of the group of people that are innovating, that are mentioned or that are worth being talked about in certain media outlets to deal with the problems that we're all facing as a society and as humanity, as a human species. And that's what I'm working on right now.
It's interesting to read that you moved to Los Angeles to pursue your true passion, surfing every day.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. I mean, work-life balance comes up a lot from my audience. They want to know how to get work-life balance. But tell us a little bit about that passion.
Yeah. Well, let me start with saying that work-life balance is another falsehood that doesn't exist, especially if you're an entrepreneur. And I think you never cease to be one once you get into it. It is about, once again, finding certain things that make you feel. Like, I think it is really important to stay in touch with your feelings and your emotions when you're doing some heavy duty sacrifices in your life and with your friends and your family. You need to be in touch with yourself. And surfing is that for me. It's nature. It's a place where cell phones and screens are not present, even if a cell phone brand created a surfboard with a screen on it, and some people still dare to have their Apple Watch in the water and check messages. I think it's still one of those places, like a sanctuary for me and for many people. Now, is it balancing my life? No, it's actually completely making it much more difficult sometimes, because I have to make even more time to drive to a surf break that is working, to just be away from everyone and not answer any calls, any emails or anything. And you have to educate a lot of people on what that means and why that is important for you. So but it is actually what motivated my move from New York City. I lived in New York for almost 15 years, and it was time to, I mean, the day I think I was going to Rockaway Beach in the subway. I was basically taking the subway at 5 a.m. with my surfboard, an hour and a half. People were asking me, are you going to the Caribbean? And I'm like, no, I'm going to Rockaway. I'm surfing. It's winter. I know, it's crazy. And then I was heading back another hour and a half at like 10 in the morning. And I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? Why am I spending 3 hours in the subway to surf every day? Like, there's something there that needs to change. And that's when I went to a place where I could do that easier, in an easier way.
And how I love LA personally. You rate it over New York? You think it's if you were to live in the US, is it LA or New York?
Both cities have an incredible community of artists and creatives. Still, I think all the people that say that New York is dead right now are just not right. I have to say that in the last few months, especially during this pandemic, I would have felt incredibly trapped in New York City in a studio apartment or a small apartment, not being able to go to the office, like having to do all the things that I'm doing remotely, and not being able to be with the people that I enjoyed collaborating and talking to. So right now for me, Los Angeles is definitely the place to be, both because the industry that I want to keep developing my career in is here, but also because of the fact that, I have access to nature. I'm currently in the mountains. I'm surrounded by trees. I look out and I see the sky. I see plenty of wonderful, vegetation, and I think that's something that it takes a lot of work in New York to get to. I lived by Washington Square Park. I also saw trees when I came out of the house, but there were a lot of activities that became more difficult. So that's a really I'm not committing to one or the other. It's an answer that doesn't really explain much. I think the one thing that I would say is that there is what I've experienced both with my friends and people who work in my sector is that a lot of people are moving west, especially in this kind of uncertainty where people are starting to appreciate having a bit more space or having an environment where there is not so much aggression on a daily basis for survival.
Okay. Were your parents entrepreneurs? How did they take the news that you were leaving the BBC to do your own business?
Yeah. Yes, in a way. My dad at some point made a decision to, leave the family business. He was a lawyer, and he became an independent lawyer and ran his own firm for many years. And so I grew up in an environment where I saw my dad and my stepmom talk about money and about the importance of, keeping things very well organized so we could all have food on the table. So I was very much aware of saving and doing things that they did while also running their own business. My mom was an entrepreneur and is an entrepreneur in a way, on her way, in the sense that she's had so many different jobs and she's always managed to survive through raising a kid as a single mom, and again I think a single mother holding different jobs, trying to find the best place for your kid, that is a business in itself. It's you have a product, if you will, that's your kid. You want to give your kid the best opportunities and the best environment to grow up in, and you're gonna make everything happen for that to become a reality.
I think that's true. And I personally think single parents deserve awards. I've got a 3-year-old, and it's one of the hardest jobs in the world. One of the most fulfilling too, but it really is. I've run big companies, and I would say it's a lot easier to run big companies than look after a child properly. And so single mothers deserve awards. Single fathers deserve awards. It's a big thing, and as you say, can change lives if it's done right. Do you think today, when you measure success, how do you look at success today for yourself? What is success?
Success is, once again, bringing the things that you want to do in your life and the things that you need to do in your life to keep living closer together. And sometimes that doesn't translate into financial success. One of the hardest times in my life when I moved actually to LA, and I had to transition both my business approach to things and my personal approach, my spiritual approach to life. I I look at it as one of the most successful periods of my life too. And this is not, again, one of those stories of like, yeah, I went through the desert and I came successful and up and I'm so strong because I'm the idea of the masculine man who serves. And no, not at all. It's the opposite of that. It was a surrender to the elements, to the environment, to the fact that I had to share an apartment for the first time in so many years. I had to figure out how to get out of debt for the business in a way that had happened completely unexpectedly after one of the biggest projects that we had with Netflix, success in that particular moment was surrender, was actually being able to get to a place of happiness, of bliss, by surfing every day, by waking up early in the morning, spending 2 hours in the water, then going back home, seeing that I had no emails or no business leads, and deciding that I was going to keep doing things, that I was going to create, I was going to write. And that's what I started doing. I started writing the TV show and film that I'm writing right now. And I started setting the foundations of what years later was going to become something tangible. But that could only happen from a place of surrender. And it is not surrender understood as I have been beaten up and I lost. It's a surrender understood as an awareness of the fact that no matter what I do, and this is a sort of a cognitive dissonance moment for an entrepreneur, is like, no matter what I do, nothing is going to change. And I need to learn how to not do things. And I need to stay put for as long as I can until things change when they have to. And that, the capacity to decide when to start doing things again, when to start reaching out to business contacts, to people, to artists, and when the right time is for all that, how long it's going to take me to get to that place. That is the biggest learning experience for me. It's just like being able to observe and only act upon what I'm seeing when the right time is. That's success. That's learning that and being able to apply it to my life now that I'm busy again, even if there's a lot of uncertainty. That's where like I can go through a period of time like now with a ton of uncertainty for absolutely everyone and for our industry, and decide when it is the right time to come out and say, well, this is my idea. Let's do it. Let's put it into practice.
And as you built out your business, what were the learnings, if you to look back now, what would be, for my listeners to understand as you built your business? Any insights, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think the main insight, and I'll give you three, because I like the three, the number three. There's always three options, there's always three insights. And I think the first one is, again, following a sense of what it is that makes you accomplished at a deeply personal level, not in the eyes of others. It's like, well, this is the part. It's an introspective exercise. You can only get to a point of success in your life after you've done that introspection work and you've realized, okay, well, in my life right now, for instance, to give you a specific example, success would look like, being able to surf every day in an amazing place where I have a wonderful community of people around me that I know, that I talk to, that I can support, that can support me. And while I live in that sort of place, I can also create some of the most amazing content that anyone has ever created. Well, getting to that insight, like Ramon 15 years ago in New York City and Ramon today, completely different people in terms of what we want in our lives. But there's been a lot of introspection work. So first is doing your homework at an introspective level. Meditation helps a lot for that. And there are lots of types of meditation. Like some people may not enjoy necessarily sitting down for 20 minutes, but they can write 3 pages every morning. They can do so many different things that can provide you the foundations for that introspection. The second part would be education. Honestly, there is again a huge movement of against formalized education, against college education. I can understand it in the United States when you have to go in debt for life for many people in order to get a shot perhaps at getting that job that is going to pay off your debt, and then maybe you can start investing in something that will allow you to retire. It's a devilish system, and I can understand how a lot of people may say, well, I don't want to be part of that. But I do think that at a certain level and at a certain time in your career, you need that structure. You need that those 3-4 years of reading books that are very difficult to understand, theories that are not necessarily what you want to be reading or talking about, and being somehow forced to do a lot of uncomfortable things, because what that allows you to do is to, when those hard times come later in life, you've gone through that. You've gone through a boot camp, an intellectual boot camp that keeps your curiosity alive, even in the darkest times. And as long as you have a curious instinct, you're going to find new things that you're going to be able to develop and to grow, like new seeds that you're going to be able to plant. But if there is no curiosity in the darkest of times, that's when, it's all over. So that intellectual boot camp, that for me, it was, 7 years of structured education in college, was very, very important. And I think there are different versions of that, but I do feel that it's an important insight. And the third part is, again, the community. I started with that, and I think that's my biggest message, is the fact that it is very important to have mentors that may not be officially mentors or call themselves mentors. They may become that over time, but it is very important to have an awareness of what that means in our career, because I firmly believe that I've obviously helped my mentors to develop further their careers. The photographers that I've worked with, like Jason Bell or Matthew Brooks or Nino Munoz, like they're all fashion photographers that do a lot of entertainment work, and they do all these commercials that I did with them as a DP and as a director. And thanks to that collaboration, like they were able to also further their careers and say, well, I can do this video commercials. I can create this additional content that makes me more valuable for all these companies. But at the same time, I was also having access and an opportunity to have to work with people that I would have never been able to work otherwise. And also I was able to learn from their artistry and their creativity. So that community, both in terms of people that you can work with and learn from, but also people that you can foster their growth in their careers, that one day will become also people who may hire you for something, but also people who may have the key to what to do next with your business or your company or whatever it is that you're doing. That two-folded community is incredibly relevant, especially in places where everything is so much so less. I mean, that is less structured than it is in Europe or in the United Kingdom even. I mean, the United States, it's like you have to create your community. You have to find your community and then, stick to it.
Yeah, that's often the biggest criticism I've heard of LA, that it's quite hard to build a community there. It's quite an individual, people standing on their own doing stuff thing. I guess maybe surfing helps you connect to a community, for example, right?
Yeah, correct. I mean, that was my into Los Angeles. I met a lot of people in the water who I ended up becoming friends with, and even talking about projects with. But so it was at least that created a feeling of less isolation, because it is very easy to, you know, drive from point A to point B and you're in your car, you're not talking to anyone, listening to the radio or to music or to podcasts. But it can be very isolating in that regard, especially now when, you know, it's impossible to, you know, hang out with groups of people that you don't really know. So yeah, you have to find yourself activities that already have that community part integrated in them. But again, I don't think, I mean, if I can mention like the 4 communities that I am part of. I mean, there is obviously the surfing community, there is the filmmaking and artistic community that I'm part of. There is obviously my local community. Now I'm up in the hills, but there is a group of people here that go down to the market and we talk and we discuss things and we exchange emails and ideas and whatnot. And then obviously there is also my queer community. I'm a queer filmmaker. Some of the content that I'm creating currently has also a queer component to it. And when you put them all together, you know, there are so many opportunities to exchange ideas, to meet new people also online, and to foster an outreach beyond that community. And that's actually what I would like to be seeing right now, especially with entrepreneurs and people who are at the forefront of ideas. Is like there is a huge divide in so many ways in our society, politically, financially. Inequality is a huge problem. Well, we need to reach out from our tribes, which is what it's becoming, onto and create a community of tribes, which is basically what a city and a town, like the Greek polis, is all about. It's like, what is our public space? We seem to have forgotten about that. And I think the work that you do, for instance, fostering the entrepreneur community, is very important. It's what it is all about.
Yeah, I love your point about community, and it actually takes a lot of effort to be a part of the community. But what I personally love about the entrepreneurial community is it's so diverse. There isn't actually one particular type of person from one particular type of background. You know, I feel like, law, for example, you can often say it's quite academic. People have come from an academic background. I find that the entrepreneurial community is incredibly diverse and open-minded and willing to learn, willing to help each other. But it also does have a problem of being quite siloed, especially if you're busy as an entrepreneur building a business. You end up just working on your business almost solely on your own, which can be therefore a very lonely experience, although there is a community there. But it's amazing you've built those 4 communities for yourself, and I think that that also, in my view, when you move to a new city, is very important, right? To build that out so that you can enjoy that city.
Yeah, exactly. It's what makes you find the first sort of contacts, right? It's like, well, you again, it's a work of introspection. I mean, for me, even to say that I'm a queer filmmaker has taken me years. As a reporter, there was no point in bringing my sexual identity to the table. It was like, I was a reporter. I was telling other people's stories. But now that I am creating a story that other people may share, it is important to put some identitarian labels that are not exclusive, that are inclusive, that are fostering diversity, inclusivity, and then, you know, you can basically merge all those different communities. Are there many queer surfers? No. Are there many filmmakers that are surfing? Yes, but they only do surfing content. Are there people who live in my area who surf? Not that many, because now I'm far from the beach. So that you can start kind of like reaching outside of that one community that may be the strongest one, which may be your business for the longest time while you're building it up. And that's what makes you special. It's like, I may not be the best surfer out there, but I know that I'm probably the best queer surfer filmmaker who lives in the hills, that is out in the water, and that already makes me feel much better when I'm falling on my board and, you know, breaking my head, because it's like, well, you know, I'm still pretty good. I'm just cheering myself up.
I like that. You can you start to define who you are, and ultimately by illustrating the details of who you are, it can make you unique. You know, like I guess I often say I've got one of the most popular podcasts in the world for 6'1", 40 plus white guys. You know, like, so as long as I keep defining it, I can say it's true. You know, like.
Yeah.
So yeah. But why were you embarrassed to say? Well, why did you find it hard to say that? Well, not embarrassed, you didn't say that. But why did you find it hard to say that years ago? Why was it difficult?
Well, I even had a quote on my website at the beginning when I created my personal website as a filmmaker that said that labels are for cat food cans, and I don't like labels. I think labels. I've had a gut reaction against anything that labels me in any way for my whole life. I mean, and it's been informed by my, for lack of a better word, allergy to structured religion or structured anything that has to do with ideas. The minute somebody tells me this is the truth, I will be questioning it, and that's what I've done for my whole life. And the problem with labeling myself in some way or another, until I found a way of doing it in a good way for me, is that I'm saying this is the truth about myself, and there is no question about it, and don't you dare challenge it. And that's not how I perceive my identity. My identity is fluid. My identity is non-binary in many ways, and that's why it is important to express that, you know, all those elements of my identity that I mentioned, and there are many more, obviously, are in constant flux. You know, sometimes the surfer takes over. Sometimes the queer filmmaker takes over. Sometimes, you know, the fact that I'm from Spain and that I speak several languages takes over, and that's what makes it interesting for you know, whatever I'm creating with other people, is that I, depending on what we're doing, I can promote or talk about an aspect of my experience that will contribute and inform the thing that we're creating. And I think that flexibility versus the rigidity of the truth about myself and the world and life and God is what is very important also to build your own business as an entrepreneur. It's important to just be able to pivot, which is that awful word that we all hate, but you have to identity pivot many times throughout your career in order to succeed.
I think partly what you're talking about, my translation would be, you're talking about brand, really. You're talking about, you know, explaining who you are and why you're able to create in the way that you're creating. I mean, when you're directing, one of the things you're directing, you're going to have a certain view on it, a certain way of looking at creating it. You can jump between those different profiles within your brand that you've just described, the surfer and so on. But, you know, I think that's a thing that sometimes people forget to do within building their businesses. They're so busy looking at the business model, they're not branding themselves properly and not being authentic. And these days, I think being authentic is the key, right? For your own sanity, if nothing else, you know. But yeah, it's a very important point in building a business, and I appreciate you sharing it. I mean, I'm conscious of time, and I know our listeners only give us an hour, so I'm just to wrap up a few final questions. Do you think entrepreneurs are born or bred, and do you think your education helped you or hindered you?
I think entrepreneurs are bred. Like I said, in my case, it happened by accident, and it was out of survival. I could have pursued a full-time job and I still can. That's always an option, but it is a thing that you learn along the way, and there is a personality component to it. There is an experience component to it, but I think that it's not necessarily a DNA thing. It's definitely the experience that you have in your life informs your need to create a business or a platform for yourself. And then your second question was about education, but you cut off. What was the question?
Do you think your education helped you or hindered you? How do you feel about education generally, especially, I guess, when you get into the creative industry? But I mean, do you think one of the things a lot of our listeners I don't know if you've noticed in the UK anyway, a lot of people have started going into university because they can't find a job or they don't think they're going to get a job, so they're going back into education. Part of my pitch is, my personal belief is you can learn a lot by going out into the real world, and university is not going to necessarily teach you what's happening in the real world, which is where I think the important skills are gained. But I'm interested in other people's views because mine are not always right. And so I always like to ask my guests a little bit about their personal view on education to try and help my audience get a different perspective.
Yeah. I believe that, like I said earlier, structured education is important. That is not to say that it needs to happen at age 18 or 19 or 20. I think there is always time to go to uni and study the part of the specialty or the skill set that you will need to advance your career further. If you are going to run your own business or be at the top of a structure of any kind for your whole entire life, and you want to commit to that, and you are certain that that's going to happen, and you're not necessarily going to find a job in another company that is going to require you a degree or things like that, then you don't need to go to college necessarily. Nobody's going to be checking your credentials, but there is a number of things in life that after you've gone through the process of launching your business and bringing it to fruition, you may need a college degree for. And I'm thinking of public service. I'm thinking about CEO positions in other companies where, like, even if you've run your company very successfully, they may actually want you to be well versed in the financial fluxes of like how things work in the stock market, and having a degree in economics may be useful for that. Having to deal with regulations and law and legal issues and things that happen at a much bigger level. Probably going to Harvard has been pretty useful for Mr. Zuckerberg now that he is in congressional hearings day on and day off. So, there is not a clear answer. I think there is always time for education, but when you're younger, there is a bit of more of an opportunity to do it at a lower cost in terms of the things that you're not going to be able to do because you're going to college. It may be harder to do that at 35 or 40 years old.
Well, I see you're a visiting professor at Columbia University School of Architecture in 2014. So you've also been putting into education and giving that knowledge to people, which is I guess important. Real life experience professors is pretty important. I think that makes a big difference. So sometimes it depends on where you're going, doesn't it? I guess where you're getting the knowledge from. Yeah.
Correct. And again, spending $200,000 for 2 years may not be the best career move, especially taking into account, what your starting point is financially. If you come from a lower middle class income family, maybe your investment of that money could go into many other things that will give you a better education for what you want to do. So I don't think there's a clear answer for that.
Oh, fair. So I appreciate the comment. So just finishing off, I wanted to ask, if you went back to your younger self and gave some advice, what would it be?
I think I would have. I wanted to know if there's a lot of noise right now. There's of course, another trash track, but hopefully you can hear me.
Of course, there sound like a lot of rubbish trucks to your side. It's busy.
Yeah, blowers and rubbish trucks. They always happen at the best possible time when you're in meetings and at home now. But I think
we're running right now, listening to this on Spotify or on TikTok. They don't mind, I'm sure.
I think there is a clear advice for my younger self, and it is the advice that the Greeks used to love to put on top of their temples: know thyself, know yourself. And the only way to know yourself is by actually challenging yourself, not necessarily the way I did. And what I mean by that is, like, I wish I could have challenged myself a little bit earlier to not do things, to stay still, to enjoy nature. I grew up in Madrid. I grew up in a city. Like, there was no ocean to be seen around, and going skiing or like going to the mountains was an afterthought. It was not an afterthought. I mean, it was basically really difficult, especially when my family didn't really enjoy those things either. But I wish I had access to that a bit earlier, and I did have access to that. I just didn't see it. I didn't see it as something that could benefit me later in life, as it is right now, benefiting me.
Good advice. I'm sure your younger self would appreciate it, but I know my audience definitely do. I want to thank you for taking the time out to share with us your insights and stories, and I'm grateful. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm hoping that some of these comments help people to keep going. I mean, I think that's what we need to do right now, one day at a time.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any views or comments or questions for Ramon or myself, feel free to drop us a note. We always reply. Equally, we know you have thousands of podcasts you could be listening to, but you decide to listen to ours. We feel incredibly lucky.